let's go back to our roots. Let's go back to analyzing a deal. So, for those of you that have not seen our most recent podcast, definitely check it out with Amber. Amber just talked about all the grants are available. But for today, if you have not seen yet what we got going on, I would recommend you go and check out the podcast I did with Tyler Aiken. He's a general contractor in the Kansas City metro market, including Kansas side as well. And we went through all the different areas that you might want to consider investing for Section 8 affordable housing in the Kansas market. Now, what's even more important is that I had Tyler kind of cover very rough ranges of all the different types of costs that are related to a rehab, including how much does it cost to add a bedroom, how much does it cost to replace your electrical, your plumbing. So all of this is an effort to help you figure out, okay, what is my first step if I want to invest out of state? And I'm not saying Tyler is going to be the be all end all contractor, right? You still have to do your own due diligence. All I'm trying to do is provide you with the first step, meaning now at least you know who to get your first quote from. And obviously, you can bounce that quote up against a few other contractors and decide whether or not this market is even for you. All right. So let's keep going here, right? So now I got 313 North Esplanade Street, Leavenworth, Kansas, 66048. Now this one just popped up because I was looking at 3 bedroom plus. Are there any pictures inside? I don't have any pictures inside. Let's see. Spectacular view, hardwood floors on the main floor, grand staircase, granite large front porch, lots of character home, just waiting for some TLC. So I'm going to assume that I need to refinish the floors, repaint the entire house, and I don't know how the inside looks. So I might update this underwriting after. But hey, as an investor, this might be something that you'll see where you don't actually see a ton of pictures in the beginning. So how do you make an estimate on what it will cost to renovate? So the first thing I do is I want to take the address and I want to go get my rent estimates. I'm going to go to affordablehousing.com. I'm going to go to the owner section. I'm going to go to the rental estimate, plug in the address, plug in the bedroom count. And it says right here, the estimates that it's going to be roughly 1403 for my rent based on 24 units within a 1.5 mile radius. Great. Now, you might be wondering, why am I looking at Leavenworth? Well, Tyler just told me to check out Leavenworth. So I'm gonna trust him and see what's going on over here, right? He also told me about other markets in Kansas, and you can look them up right within the podcast. Like Overland Park is a great area that he talked about where he lives himself. So you're gonna see a bunch of these little areas that you can investigate on whether or not that's a good market for you. All right. So using this rent number, right? 1403. The other thing you might want to look up is like understanding, okay, well, what's my payment standards? So when I looked up the 4 bedroom payment standards for Leavenworth County, it goes up to 1931. The problem is 1931 is the rent ceiling. So you have to understand the rent reasonableness test. And the rent reasonableness test essentially states that you have to take the lower rent of the two, right? You can't charge more rent to someone simply because they are a voucher holder. So that's why I'm using the lower of the two, which in this case is 1403, as my estimate. Now, there's one more thing I want to check out. What is a 2 bedroom rent out for? Because with this much square footage, I'm thinking, can I split this into a duplex where it's two bedrooms and then I'll double my rent to 2400? Interesting, right? Interesting perspective. So let me go through this scenario here. All right. Let's go through and plug in the numbers as is. 169,500. 169,500. It's a 4 bed, 2 bath, 2652 square feet. So I'm going to assume I need to repaint the entire place. 2652, right? I want to make it super nice. I don't need to put in new flooring, but I do need to refinish the existing floor, 2652. So I'm going to put in $4 square foot to refinish everything to make sure everything looks really, really nice. For the roof, I'm going to assume I'm going to put in at least $1,500 to repair the roof, do some kind of patchwork. It might even be more work, to be honest, but hey, at least I got something in there for now. Cabinets, I want to repaint all my cabinets to make sure it looks nice. For my bathroom renovations, I'll probably want to do some sort of new remodel. Let's do about roughly 2 full remodels, $8,000 each. For my kitchen, let's replace all the appliances with medium, like middle of the road appliances for $5,000. Great. HVAC, I'm assuming HVAC is working, so I'm not going to replace anything yet unless I see something when I get there. All right. I'm putting a cage on my HVAC unit just so I can make sure that I don't struggle with a stolen HVAC unit. Okay, so now this is my rehab budget roughly right now, right? Just estimating at $54,000. Great. Now, if I rent this property out at 1,400, right, which is exactly the estimate I got from affordablehousing.com, let's put in the rest of my numbers. I'm gonna get my property taxes right here, 137. My homeowner insurance at 110, so I'm gonna equals 110 times 1.2, and I'm multiplying by 1.2 because I'm adding a 20% premium to that property. All right. When I add a 20% premium to that property, then you're gonna see that I'm paying roughly $132 per month. I'm adding a 20% premium because I'm assuming that the insurance company is going to view this asset as a riskier asset. Hence why I'm adding a 20% premium, because I'm assuming that 110 estimate was for someone buying it as their primary residence property. Now, the reason I like this property is because, well, it's right on the water. So it's kind of like nice. It's kind of like a little amenity, like you get to live in front of the river. I don't know if it smells or not, but at least I know that it's got a decent street view right here. Can I show you where I am? So this is this is the house, yeah. And you can see right here is a nice little long walkway where people actually hang out. I feel that's a pretty good quality of life. Honestly, I think a lot of people would enjoy being able to just take a walk outside of their house instead of being crunched up. So personally, I like it. Now, next step up. Here's what we're gonna do. Let's keep on going. I'm going to set aside 10% of my rents every single month for maintenance, right? I assume that something is going to break every single month, hence why I'm putting it aside. Because you know at some point that the HVAC, that the water heater, they're all going to be replaced at some point. So if you don't do this, you will be grossly underestimating your expenses and overestimating your profitability. Because I can tell you, I've seen real estate gurus, Section 8 gurus that says, oh, there's no maintenance. There is no maintenance. We buy things turnkey. What? That makes no sense. You know something's gonna break, right? I have my own house and I know things get break all the time, whether it's a car toilet or whatnot. All right. So now property management. I got 10% of my rent set aside for property management. Now, some people might overinflate the numbers because they self-manage their property. The problem is if you don't underwrite or you don't analyze the property with a property managed expense item now, then you're essentially buying yourself a job, right? Because if you don't set aside money right now, you can never offload that property management responsibility to somebody else. So that's why I always recommend underwriting with a property management fee in there. Then for vacancy, I always set aside 5% for vacancy because, well, that tenant's going to move out eventually, right? So if you don't set aside some money right now, you're also overestimating your expenses, right? Someone's going to always move out, whether it's they're passing away or whether or not they have kids that grow up and they move out. It's all going to happen. So just be very mindful of that. For my interest rate right now, I'm going to put aside about 7% interest rate right now. And let's see what's going on. I got 25% down on my property. I got roughly around, what's my closing costs? I'm going to do about 3.5% for closing costs. Oops. Yes. 3.5%. That seems about right. Renovations. So for this property, if I am able to get a DSCR loan for 25% down, a 7% interest rate, and I can rent this property out for $1,400, and I spend $55,000 renovating this property with cash flow, assuming I rent it out as a 4-bedroom property, I will cash flow negative $65 a month after all my expenses. Now, could I make a little bit more if I self-manage? Yeah, so I can, but I'm not going to make that assumption right now. Negative 65. That's a negative 0.8% return, cash and cash return, assuming I bought this property for $169,500. With a rehab budget of 55 grand, roughly just estimating here, with 7% interest rate. Now, interestingly enough, right, what you want to figure out is, well, if I have, let's say, what if my interest rates drop down by a little bit? And for those of you that don't understand how this works, your 30-year mortgage interest rate is affected by two factors. The first one of which is your interest rate on your 10-year treasury yield. The second one is the spread between the 10-year yield and the 30-year mortgage interest rates. Now, historically, that spread has been about 1.5% to 2%. But you can see right here, right now, between 4% to 6.2, it's about 2.2. So that big move of interest rates, right? The effect of the 10-year yield on the 30-year mortgage rate has it jumped already. So you might have about another 0.2 to go on a spread. So don't pay attention to what's happening with the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve is always going to be later and behind the bond market. What you want to figure out is, okay, where is the 10-year yield right now? And the best way to look about it is just track the 10-year bond yield. You can see right here, it was like it went as high as what was it? It went as high as 4.8 just in January. And now it's come all the way down to 4. So that was like a big 0.8 point move. That's a huge move from 4.8 to 4%. So you can really have these big movements of half a point, 1 point move overnight. So let's do this. If all of a sudden my interest rate in K7 dropped to 6.5%, what happens? I make a little bit more money, not a big difference. But now let's say you're trying to achieve an 8% return. What do you have to buy this property for you to get an 8% return? Now, because of my rehab estimate is so high, I would have to buy this property for roughly 65 grand, because that rounds up. So I'll have to buy this property for 100 grand lower than what it's listed for in order to achieve my target return of 8%. Now, you might not care about appreciation. You might say, oh, you know what? I don't really care, blah, 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 473. But now I'm 6.5%. Great. That's completely up to you. But what if you overestimate your rehab? Let's say you have my friend Tyler go in there, give you a quote, and says, oh, I can get this done for 27 grand. Well, now your cash and cash return jumped up. So now you might say, well, now I can afford to pay 90 grand for this property in 65, right? Assuming everything else stays constant. And that's how you keep this analysis non-emotional, meaning you're staying very objective, you're staying very numbers focused, and you're trying to figure out, what should I buy this property for, right? Assuming 6.5% from the last scenario, but now my rehab's 22,500. That's how you play with the different levers to figure out what is a deal for you, quote unquote. Again, this is non-investment advice. Some of you might want like a 10% return, right? That's completely up to you. But all I'm sharing with you is how you pull the levers to figure out accordingly what can you afford to pay for a certain property. And that's why we're doing this. All right, so let's keep on going. Let's say I turn this property into a duplex, right? Well, let's keep the 55 grand so that I still have more thing. But what extra rehab do I have? Let's say I replace the entire roof to make this happen. Let's call it a 15 grand roof rehab. Let's say so the paint and the flooring stays the same, but maybe I need to put in an additional kitchen, right? So an extra 10 grand for an additional kitchen. Maybe I have to add a new bathroom somewhere. Just adding a little bit there. I don't even know if it's possible because I haven't seen inside photos yet. Maybe I need to put in a new HVAC for the property. Replace some ductwork. Get an extra cage. Replace all the plumbing. replace all the electrical for the property. Now my rehab's up to $126,000. Okay, great. That's a really, really big rehab, right? But I'm turning this property into a duplex. Hey, maybe that's worth it, maybe it's not. But if you remember from what we saw earlier, right? If I rent it out as a 2-bedroom for the same exact property, it's $1,200 per unit. So if I get this to $2,400, is this worth it? No, not if your return is 8%. So you might still say, hey, if I had to spend that much money to get 8% return, I think I have to buy this property for 110 grand. So 2x2, that's $2,400 in rent, right? Because 1,200 times 2, I can cash flow $1,009 a month at 8% return, but now I have to buy it for 110 grand. But now I'm assuming my estimate is $127,000. 25% on that, 6.5% interest rate. Now, could that be a deal? It might be. Depends on whether or not I get a additional bump for turning into a duplex, right? It might be worth more in that scenario. But these are all the factors that you have to decide on. So right now, I'm only going to focus on assuming it's a rental, not even assuming what a duplex costs. What I would do next is try to figure out what does a duplex sell for in that area, in that market, as a duplex, to see whether it's worth me making that rehab, because I might be able to pull back out all my capital, right? So hopefully this is helpful, everybody. I can go through that scenario tomorrow, but I just want to go through the different levers that you can pull today to figure out whether or not something is a deal for you, quote unquote. All right, so for those of you that want to follow along and do the same property, go to affordablehousing.io. Affordablehousing.io. You can go to the Get Deal Analysis tool, put your name, your email, your phone number, and that's the fastest way for you to get a copy of your spreadsheet. My hope is this: I hope you copy the same deal I said today using the same spreadsheet. And I hope you start your own YouTube channel. Seriously, I hope you start your own, because at some point someone's gonna ask you, hey, why do you think this is a deal? And the only way you're gonna know this is a deal is because if you look at the past 750 days in a row of you trying to get better, you analyzing deals, well, I bet you would feel much more confident about it. All right. Hope you all have an amazing Saturday. Hope you all spend some quality time with your family and friends today, because that's what life is all about. All right.